And what are the challenges or even opportunities that you've passed through to get to where you are today?
My biggest challenge was being a woman. that was the biggest challenge, yes.
Hi, my name is Juliette, and I'm the creator and host of Connecting the Dots podcast. I love ideas and problem solving, and my career in communications has led me down a path of curiosity. Why we do what we do, how we tell better stories, and how African scientists solve everyday problems. Join me on this enlightening and entertaining exploration of African science like you've never experienced before. Get ready to laugh, learn, and be inspired. On this episode of Connecting the Dots podcast, I am joined by Her Excellency Professor Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, former President of Mauritius, who is an internationally acclaimed biodiversity scientist. She has had a distinguished career in research and leadership, and prior to her presidential role, she founded and managed International Center for Pharmaceutical Development, Research and Innovation. Welcome, Professor Ameenah Gurib-Fakim.
Thanks, Juliette. It's a pleasure to be meeting here in this space.
So we want to touch a little bit on biodiversity. On this particular episode of Connecting the Dots podcast, we will be looking at biodiversity, climate and health. Before we do that, we are interested to hear a little bit on your personal journey and your professional career as well. What made you end up in studying biodiversity and looking at medicinal products?
You know, I've had a very eclectic journey. I grew up in a very small village in Mauritius where there was hardly anything at all at the time when I was growing up. And but there was a couple of things that have really marked my journey. One was a school and a library, and it was a Catholic school, and I am Muslim by faith. And then there was the airport, which was nearby. Now, you may think this is quite different kind of milestone or landmarks I'm talking about. But the school was important because I was lucky enough to have had a father who believed in empowering girls and educating girls. So he gave me all the joy of going to school, getting education, and even funded me when it did not make economic sense to be educating and funding, of course, the education of a girl. So I was lucky. I got an education. I went to a convent school. That matters because I live in what I call the microcosm of the world, where all the cultures, it was really a convergence of all the cultures. And this really made me who I am. Unfortunately, these days, we hear a lot of rhetoric about the differences, highlighting the differences. But we showed, or at least I could show the world, that there's so much more uniting us than dividing us. Then I was again lucky because I went to convent school for my secondary education, and I was blessed with motivated teachers who actually demystified science for me. You know, when I was growing up again, the school had no infrastructure for actually teaching science, but I was taught science in real life, right? In our immediate environment.
And it's funny, you are one of the most accessible former heads of state I have come across in my career, and it speaks really to your, to just the way you function and operate in terms of making sure that you're accessible to the public, to the media, and also to the scientific community, as well as even politicians. You and I have had many conversations where you said or referenced, your discussions with our current presidents on the African continent. So I think that speaks a lot to the type of person that you are. I want to go back to your profile. I really appreciate, and you've underscored the importance of parenthood, listening to your career trajectory and the role your father played, the role your teachers played, the role, your exposure to UK, and then also coming back to the continent and recognizing that there is a gap, and to your innovations in setting up a company that would begin to address medicinal plants or products. I want to explore the issue about medicinal plants. So my mother is one such lady who, bless her heart, loves to have multiple natural remedies, even though I would tell her, no, why don't you go to the chemist or the pharmacy and get this treatment for that? Because again, the young people always think they know better than their parents. She's very intense about natural remedies. and has endless herbs and potions at home. And she usually sometimes combines this with supplements here and there. Is that the same experience for you from a family setting? Did you see this growing up as well? Have grandparents or even your own parents who would use local products to be able to cure ailments? And what role does that have, especially in our world today where we are seeing, I know on the continent, we do a lot of importation of pharmaceutical products, whereas we can actually be tapping into our own plants, locally sourced. What are your thoughts on this?
There's a very famous African saying that says, let your food be your medicine and let your medicine be your food. Right?
Yes.
And there's a lot of wisdom in this. And if you look at modern medicine, right? Modern medicine has really started existing after the World War, right? When they started discovering antibiotics, right?
Yeah.
What was there before? What was the main arsenal for therapeutic before that? It was, of course, herbal medicine. And unfortunately, with the lobby in the West, it went ahead with giving this form of medicine a bad name. And if you look at the statistics, the WHO statistics, it is quite shocking, because if you look at a country like Ethiopia, they will depend up to 92% on herbal medicine. And interestingly, what is happening, if you look at the statistics in the West, a country like Germany, the statistics is very near, which means there is a tendency to go back to herbal knowledge because we find there's a lot of complementarity with it. If you want to get some of the best Chinese traditional medicine, for example, you go to Germany as well these days, right? So what I'm trying to say is that there is a law of knowledge. There is a lot of wisdom in the practices of our ancestors. But where we are weak on the continent is that, we've never given enough recognition and enough respect. Well, I will come back to this in a minute. We haven't given enough respect to our own ancestral knowledge.
Why do you feel the traditional plant medicine, prevalent across the continent, receives limited recognition and integration within both local, national, regional, and global healthcare systems?
Because most of our doctors are Western trained. And in the West, they are not taught to actually do traditional medicine. They are taught allopathic medicine. And in fact, they are actively being trained to shun traditional practices. So there has to be this is exactly what they're doing in France, for example. They are retraining some of the doctors to actually learn to appreciate. But it goes beyond the doctors. It also goes back to our policymakers. They need to drive the right policies to make sure that there is acceptance. This is how Chinese develop. And India, there's the same thing as well, because through Ayurveda, they have been able to document, they have been able to now they have a full-fledged database of Ayurvedic medicine. There's a big push as well across India to favor Ayurvedic medicine, which is, of course, showing its worth. And the therapeutic potentials are there. So we need to do that for our own recipes, for our own pharmacopoeia, and it has to come from our policymakers as well.
So what is the role of politics on the continent with regards to preserving biodiversity and creating ecosystems for research and innovations? What is it that our policymakers, our presidents, our ministers need to be doing more of and less of, from your perspective?
Our presidents and our leadership, rather, I think they have agreed to join quite a few of the international conventions, which requires the protection of biodiversity. And I think very soon we're going to be heading to COP16. When I say COP16, of course, it's the COP for biodiversity. And I think there has been a general consensus that something has to be done. Now, how fast it's happening, that's another issue. Because we have so many challenges on the continent that we tend to forget that the very biodiversity, which is like the branch on which we're sitting on, should not be cut. And I think this is the message that we have to keep on playing to our leadership that, they need to do more in terms of protection of our biodiversity. Sometimes that very same biodiversity gets sacrificed for short-term economic gains, like for example, cutting the forests to grow food crops, whereas the same forest could have been used for agroforestry and doing other practices, which will bring more in the long term. But because they are confronted with short-term gains in politics for the election cycle, this, of course, they take short shrift. And this is something that we have to work on.
What, in your view, do you see as the role of African, not leaders only, but also citizens in taking into account major greenhouse gas emitters who are accountable for climate crisis, considering Africa's minimal contribution, but we contribute minimally to climate change, yet we are the most affected, and our biodiversity is also left exposed. What would you tell citizens to do more of also?
Well, I'll be controversial here. I will say that we need to go back to our own way of doing things. I'll just give you one example. Let's take, for example, the example of agriculture. So far, we have been driven by the concept that we need intensive agriculture, because intensive agriculture, which has resulted eventually to the Green Revolution,
is that large-scale agriculture?
Yeah, large-scale intensive agriculture. But if you look at the way agriculture is practiced on the continent, it is mostly rain-fed, and 85% of the output of agriculture comes from smallholder farmers. When I say smallholder farmers, we're talking about those who have ownership of about 2 or 3 acres of land. And these are the people who produce most of our food. So while my motivation would be to empower these people more, right? To create the cooperative that they need so that they can share the resources. The women who are actually practicing agriculture, and also women, tend to be in the informal economy. And this is something that we have to pay attention to, because if these women who are operating in the of course, informal economy get the appropriate framework, they can do so much. Exactly. And when you come back again to agriculture, we have to go back to our traditional practices. I'll just give you one example. When our countries go to seek a loan from the World Bank, they come back with a package, with a suite of issues like the way to irrigate, the way to use fertilizers and all the rest of it. But it's not fit for purpose in many parts of Africa because of the changing weather pattern. Now, if you're going to actually take agriculture, where are you going to get the water from? Because water is rain-fed, agriculture is rain-fed, and with a cycle of rainfall, which is quite erratic, it's not possible to do that. So we have to go back to some of the traditional practices which have been very successful, like digging holes before the rainy season, and the water is stored in these holes. And then when the time comes for planting, it plants. And this is a practice which has been operational successfully in many parts of Central and Western Africa. So go back to our practices. Also learn to transform the products, right? Let's say, for example, a country like Kenya, growing one place they grow tomatoes, other place they grow green vegetables. Let's try and transform so it becomes accessible not just to Kenya, but also why can't we trade with Tanzania, which is next door?
Right.
This is how we ensure food security. So the empowerment will come with the empowerment and the change in mindset of our young people, that solutions are within reach, and we need to just grab it.
And what are the challenges or even opportunities that you've passed through to get to where you are today?
My biggest challenge was being a woman.
Wow. Ameenah.
That was the biggest.
I don't know whether to be, I don't know how to feel about that one. As a woman, yeah.
It's true.
Explain.
I'll tell you what, when I wanted to do science, I was told science is for boys.
It's for boys. Yeah.
When I went to do a degree, when I was there, I was, of course, minority. There were very few women in my class. I come back and do a PhD, again, very few women there. I come back, join the faculty, very few women there. But the message I have is that the way I have been able to move forward is because I have focused on hard work. I have focused on quality, because quality knows no gender. And when you'll be assessed by your peers, your work will be assessed, not your gender or your person. So focus on quality, focus on good work, hard work, and that's the way forward. And also, I must say, the other challenge I find, and this applies mostly to the women folk, is that please let us all rise together. Don't elbow other women out. Those women who are making it, please, let us, as a sisterhood of women, let us try and see how we can keep that woman there at the top for as long as possible, because she will be that role model for our young girls. And when the young girls find that there is this cohesion among the women folks and how we're going to work together, I mean, this is how we leave behind a legacy. But unfortunately, Juliette, we find that many women, when they reach a certain position, A, they become more men than men, and B, they will elbow out other women out there. So that's not the way forward. So that's the challenge that we have to grab. And of course, when you reach the world of politics, I mean, after having confronted all these issues, because you get the men trying to pull you down because you're a woman, you get the woman trying to pull you down because you're a woman and they should have been in your place. And when you reach the world of, at the level of the State House, there you have to learn to walk on eggs without breaking them.
Wow.
And these are some of the issues. But the best part of all this is that you can say to that girl in my village, you can make it.
And you and I have just recently come from a European Commission meeting on climate and health. And one of the fascinating things for me there was the role and inclusion of the youth and young people in even deciding and putting together things like regulation and policy decisions. I thought that was quite interesting. I come from a background of science, and I always feel like the scientist is the one with the knowledge. But, in different conversations, you begin to see the role of community, the role of young people in contributing and even charting the way forward. So I really like your point about just looking at regulation, especially when it comes to things like AI and the people who are using this more and more. I have a 7-year-old. She can navigate my phone more than I can. So in terms of even just using such technology, you can see the role that they play there. I want to move away a little bit from your presidential role, your hat as a scientist, to your hat as a citizen, a global citizen in the world. If you were a supervillain or a superhero, what power would you have? Or what would you want to be drawn up as? I think the Marvel Studios haven't exhausted superheroes, so I think we need to be recommending a couple of ideas to them. What superpower would you want to be having, Ameenah?
Be a superhero in Wakanda.
Be a superhero in Wakanda. And what would be your superpower then? What would you be having? Is it something to do with plants?
There are so many others. I mean, I look at actresses like Viola Davis, for example, and the way she did the African.
Another role model, yes.
I mean, she's absolutely fascinating as a persona. And I think if we were to get this magic wand, I think I'd like really to create opportunities, much more opportunities for our young people. And I think there is this dearth of, looking through this glass, through the window and saying, what's in store for me? And to create the avenue to kind of use that wand and say, look, this is the way forward. This is the route you need to take. And, hopefully Nirvana would, but the road is not going to be easy. It's not going to be smooth sailing. And so this is what I think. And I also worry because I will have children, and you makes you wonder, what the future holds, because things are looking so uncertain at planet. There's so much injustice around, and also on a political level, I found that our multilateral system is collapsing. We're finding a much more fragmented world, and a much more fragmented world means, of course, a more insecure world. And unfortunately, this is the legacy we're going to be leaving behind out for our children. So until we start getting our act together, we start getting really reasonable players around the table and think that there is only one planet, one world, and that we all have to share it. And I insist on the word sharing because it's not seem to be on the agenda of many people. So we need to really work hard and develop and create a kind of a narrative which is comforting and reassuring for our young people that it is possible to still, make headway, but the future is looking very, very uncertain.
Science is a problem solver in an uncertain world or an uncertain future. How do we inspire young kids to follow your pathway, whether it's young girls and boys as well included, to become the next top scientists in whatever field they want, whether it's in astronomy, whether it's in discovery of new medicinal plants. How do we get them excited and fascinated to follow a scientific career pathway and also one in leadership?
So, for science, we need to start changing the way we teach science. Science has to be taught by learning. Science, you need to feel something. You need to smell it, you taste it. You need to actually be able to feel it. And one way we have to, and again, I come back again to the African continent, let us look at the way we can tropicalize the way we teach science to our girls and boys. Let's, for example, that when you look at the alphabet, A will not be for apple. A will be for something else in the African context. S will be for sorghum. M will be for millet. F will be for fonio. I mean, this is what we have to do, is make science relevant to that child in Africa growing up. And so we need to do that. We need to make it accessible. We need to see, for example, what dye do the Maasai use to make the clothing red, for example? Do they use synthetic dyes or do they use traditional dyes? What are they using? Let them go and discover. So this will be the way that we can increase the numbers of girls and boys into the science. Then we need to actually block the leaky pipe syndrome for the girl to stay in the sciences. And that's another syndrome that we have to fix, because increasingly we find that women, especially girls, they tend to leave, drop out of the system because of too many pressures. So we need to nurture the next generation of female scientists and female leaders. Why do we need female leadership? And I have an adage what I say to girls: you will not have your place at that table. You will need to bring your own chair at that table. And if you don't have the chair, go and make it and bring it. Because if you do not have the place at that table, you're going to be part of the menu. So we're going to have to really work hard to actually nurture these young girls and boys, especially girls, because we are the one who are left behind, to make sure that create that new leadership. But that new leadership that will be empowered with the tools of science. And that will be the way forward for them. Well, I've always had a great admiration for Marie Curie at the time, because she's, can you imagine her walking around the lab with a black dress, long dress in the 1900s, and having had 2 Nobel Prize? I mean, it's not easy. And of course, she was denied a post of lecturer at Sorbonne because she was a woman. So she has been, of course, a great model for me. But recently I've had, for example, as I said, Tu Youyou, another Chinese scientist, and of course, Wangari Maathai on the continent.
And speaking about Wangari Maathai, here's an excerpt from Wangari.
Well, I like to tell about the story of a hummingbird, because quite often we feel overwhelmed. So this story of a hummingbird, which I learned from Japan, is the story of a forest that caught fire. And it was a huge fire. And it was raging. And all the animals came out of the forest and stood by the edge of the forest. And they were watching the fire. They were very overwhelmed. They were powerless. They felt like there was nothing they could do, because the problem was too much for them, except this little hummingbird. The hummingbird said, I'm going to do something about the fire. So it flew to the nearest stream, took a drop of water, and flew back and put it on the fire. Then back again, brought another drop of water and put it on the fire. And it kept going as fast as it could, every time bringing a drop of water and putting it on the fire. In the meantime, all these animals are discouraging it and are persuading it not to bother, because it is too little. You have a beak is too little. You are bringing very little water. And some of the animals that are talking like that are the elephants with the big trunks, which could bring much more water. But the hummingbird just kept doing what it knew best, without wasting any time, and to stop them when they said, what do you think you are doing? And the hummingbird said, I'm doing the best I can. And for me, and I hope for you, that's all we can do. Whoever we are, wherever we are, there is something in our lives that we can do. No matter how small it is, collectively, it will make a difference. So be a hummingbird in your community, wherever you are.
I mean, there are so many others who are around. And I think what we have to do on our continent is make sure that when we write books for our kids, we bring out these African models, these African role models, because these are the people we can relate to, because they look like us.
Thank you so much for your time, Ameenah. We're really grateful to have been able to host you on this podcast.
Thank you so much, Juliette. All the best.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Her Excellency Professor Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, Council of Women Leaders and former President of Mauritius, who has joined us from Mauritius. Connecting the Dots is recorded and produced by Teamwork at AMP Studios in Nairobi, Kenya. Join me, Juliette, as I interview the next amazing African scientist on the next episode of Connecting the Dots podcast. It is available on your favorite podcast app on Apple or Android. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and tell a friend or enemy about us.